Hey YouTube, how's it going? Welcome back to part 19 of our multiplayer series with Unity and Node.js. Today we're going to be taking our database stuff a little step further and we're going to start connecting it to our game server. So if you guys want to open up your game server, the current state I have it in right now is from part 17 for the AI. And I also have my database up and running. You can check in the bottom, we're up and running in green, and I'm connected through the browser. And just like last time, I have a sample database, users table, and some entries inside the user. So the goal with the server is that I'm gonna show you an npm package to connect to the database. We're gonna do some setup so that when we get online and we do eventually get this hosted, we will be able to have all the configurations to swap between local and remote. And then we're going to do some querying samples like we were doing in the last video where I was just doing it through the panel here. We're going to do them through Node.js and just kind of get that data back. And then we'll call it done for there. And then after that, in the next part, we'll do actually something with the database. Okay, cool. So if you want to open up your server here, I just have the index open and the server. So the idea is that for games, I've found that I want to have a single database class. And the class gets housed inside the server. And it can be passed to game lobbies and stuff. But all the game lobbies tend to have a reference to server. So if I just store one connection reference to the database, everybody can access it here. So the idea is that in here, we're going to have a this.database. And it's going to be equal to our new database. So I'm just going to comment that out for now. But just note that this is where it's going to kind of be housed. Not every game lobby gets a database because game lobbies are going to be spinned up and spinned down all the time. You only need one reference to the database. We're also going to be doing this pooling technique that's recommended for the database. So it kind of will create a couple connections for us. So it's going to spin up and spin down. And then we'll be able to have this pool connection, be able to make sure it's self-sustaining over time and it doesn't disconnect and stuff that typically happens when you have a connection for a long time and you're not making a request to it. It'll tend to time out and stuff. This will kind of avoid all those issues that I've found myself run into all the time. So we're gonna have the server there. So the first thing we're gonna do is under utility here. What do we got here? We're actually going to put it under just classes, not even under utility. We're just going to put it under classes here. Yeah. So under classes, we're going to add... Oh, you know what? It's going to add it to utility anyways. So, okay. Let's drag this out into classes. Yes, I want to move it. So it's classes / database.js here. And we'll create that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create some JSON files. We're going to create one for the local setting and one for what will eventually be your hosted setting. It's going to mimic local right now, but we're just going to set up that file. Essentially what the file does is it's going to tell us that we want to connect to this database. So if you remember how we logged in, it was using root with a blank password and that stuff. So it's going to be very similar to that. So we're gonna, outside of classes here, we're gonna create a new folder, call it files. Inside of files, we're gonna create a database settings.json, and then create another file called database settings local.json. Beautiful. And inside the local, like I said, we're going to be copying between the two of them, so it doesn't matter which one you're actually starting in. We're going to create an object here. We're going to call this host. We're going to type in localhost. Make sure it's lowercase. We're going to type in user. This is going to be root, right? Because we are logging into root. The password here is blank. And the database that we want to connect to is going to be sample underscore database. And if you're trying to figure out which database you want to connect to, head on over to PHP MyAdmin and find out which database you want to connect to, which would be the same spelling here. Make sure it's case sensitive just in case. And we're going to copy this whole object and put it into database settings.json. Like I said, this is going to change for your remote, but just for now, we'll just have it as a safety, have it mimic the local. You can go ahead and close those now if you'd like. And let's start on database. So the package that we're going to be using, if you guys want to check it out, you guys can go to the npm manager. We're going to be using one called just MySQL. Super simple as that. That doesn't help anybody when I'm typing it right there. There we go. How's that? Okay, there we go. So we're going to do an npm install MySQL. All one word, all lowercase. We're going to hit this. We're going to let it go. Ooh, we got some vulnerabilities, so a bunch of packages probably updated. We can just run an npm fix here. See how it lets us get it. Make sure you guys are always like updating your packages and stuff. Don't want to run into issues down the line. Okay, cool. We're just gonna leave that for now. Whatever, how many is left or whatever, we can fix it later. All right, so we're gonna do let MySQL. It's going to be equal to the package MySQL lowercase. We're also going to bring in database settings, which is equal to, what do we got here? They're under files, so we got to do one more back slash database settings, and I like to put the .json here. And let's go ahead and copy that line. We'll add local to the end here. And let's go ahead and add our class. So module exports can be equal to class of database. We're gonna have a constructor. So the constructor is gonna bring in a Boolean variable. It's going to be starting off as default, false, and it's going to be is local. So by default, it's always going to fall back to local, but if we can determine that we're on a hosted server, and I'll show you how we can determine that, it's going to swap it over to using the hosted database, which is kind of cool. Like, you don't really have to like change anything when you go to deploy it to the live server or anything. It just kind of just works. It's super handy. Otherwise, you're going to forget, and it gets really annoying. Okay, so so we're gonna store, we have to pick which one we're gonna use. So we're gonna have this current settings. If it's local, then we wanna use database settings local. And you realize I'm not using a new, I'm just like, this is an actual file I loaded. And then else database settings, just database settings. And for anybody who's never seen this before, that's just like an inline if statement, basically, where it's saying, here's our logic. If it's true, it's this. If not, it's this. I don't know if I've used them in my tutorials yet. We got this pool. It's going to be equal to a MySQL.create pool. So this was, they have a variety of types. So most people, when they first started, they'll start creating a connection. Then you'll start running into timeout issues because your server is always online. Creating the pool and stuff will avoid that, where it kind of spins up and spins down, as I was talking about earlier. It takes in a couple parameters, which are the parameters we're actually storing in our JSON file. So let's go ahead and put those in there. Password. Oh, make sure that's a capital. And database. Beautiful. And so when we go in the constructor, we're going to choose the file we need, and we'll create a pool for the connection here. Okay, cool. So we're going to create a function called connect. It's going to have callback. This is a generic function that's going to be used by every single query function. Essentially, it's going to say, it's going to take in the pool, and then it's going to get me a connection from the pool. If there's an issue, it's going to throw an error. If not, it's going to give it back to my callback, which then we could start querying on that. And it's just like a utility thing. You won't use it outside of this class. It's just going to be used inside this class, basically. So we're going to say pool.getConnection. This is going to take in, it's going to give us an error and a connection. If error, throw error. Otherwise, callback. And callback's going to be a function. We're going to call back with connection there. Okay, cool. Okay, so for our two queries, we're going to do two sample ones. We're going to do one where we just select all the data from the users, right? So if I go back to the database, we're going to just try and grab all this data. The other one is I'm going to have a parameter. And the reason why I'm going to show you one with the parameter is how we can avoid things like SQL injection and stuff by using this library, which is super handy. And we're going to be doing it by passing in a username, which is going to be kind of cool. So we're just going to write those really quick. They're going to mimic very much like what I was showing inside the SQL, and maybe I'll show them inside here first so you can kind of see my typical workflow. So we're going to say get sample data. And the sample data is a callback. So these don't really work. These work asynchronously in the sense that your code's going to keep continuing. It's not going to wait for the database call to come back. But don't assume that if you make a database call and then make one right after, the first one's going to return first. Okay, and you're going to see that in our sample, that the first one we actually call returns second. So you have to keep that in mind, and you have to kind of do like a chain of calls if you need to do multiple SQL queries. Okay, so sample data is gonna just have a callback. We're gonna say this.connect, connect, and it's gonna return us a connection. And then, okay, so what it's gonna do is it's gonna call this function here. And it's going to say connect, give us a connection basically. With this connection, we're going to have a query. And we're going to say select all from users. And like I was saying before, if you're having difficulty or you don't understand SQL, make sure you check out the W3 Schools stuff. It's really good. And let's just make sure this is actually going to return us stuff. So let's copy this line. We'll go into PHP-admin. Make sure you're clicked under the users table, right? Because if I go here, this in SQL, make sure you're actually under users table. Delete this, paste our line, and hit go. And you'll see that it does return us data, so we know that our query is working. Okay? Always do it here first. Don't just assume that what you typed in is correct. Do it here first, and then bring it over here. And then, okay, so now we have our query that we want to query. We're going to say connection query. We're going to pass in the query. And then it's going to return to us an error with some results. Beautiful. We're going to make sure we release the connection. So we're going to say connection release. Then we're going to check for an error. And yes, you have to do this every time. And then we're going to do our callback with the results. Sometimes you might do another query here. Sometimes you might configure. You'll see the data the result come back in. Sometimes you might want to make it more pretty, or only return. Well, I guess you wouldn't really just want to return parts of it. You'd probably want to return all, because if you're only going to return parts of it, you wouldn't want to search for all. But maybe you want to make it pretty. And yeah, we're going to return the result. So we're going to connect, make the query, perform the query, release the connection, check if we had an error, and then return with our results. Okay, let's get this set up So we can call it, and then we'll do the next version of this with a username. Okay, so we're going to go into server here, and we have to set up our database. So let database, let's make this a capital D. It's equal to require database. Beautiful. This database is going to be equal to a new database with is local. And you're like, well, we don't have is local. So we're going to do the very same thing that we did with the database, where it's going to be is local is equal to default. And we're going to save that. We're going to go to index. That's where server is created. We're going to go up to server, and we need to pass in a Boolean value. So how do we determine if it's a local or if it's a hosted server? One good way, and this is why we did this part, was if it's a hosted server, it's going to give us a specific port that's open for us to use, the environment port. So if we can determine that the environment port is set, then we're hosted, and if it's not, it's most likely going to be this number, and it's a local value. So if I say if process.environment.port is equal to undefined console.log local server, else console.log hosted server. Beautiful. And then we can take this little line here and we can say it's local if this is true, right? Because that's what we just did here logic wise. We hit save. Let's make sure we're starting this. So npm node, either npm start or nodemon start, your call. And it's saying the server started and we're a local server because we don't have the environment port set. Beautiful. This is a good tag to have. Keep it around, because when you do host on Heroku or whatever, or your desired platform, it should say hosted server. If it's not, then you're having issues with setting this port. You'll have to look into that further. Okay, so we're not really doing too much. Let's try and get some sample data. So we're just going to be showing the sample data right here in the constructor. Like I said, this would probably be in your game logic, server logic somewhere down here, but this is just some sample testing, just to kind of show you your connection is actually like indeed working. So sample testing, we're going to say this.database.get sample data. And sample data, if we go back to database, requires a callback. And the callback is going to give us some results. So we're going to say results, and we're going to do a little function, and let's just say console log results. Beautiful. And if I start that up, you're going to see that the query performed, and it returned to us three things. It returned to us 3 rows, each with like a little JSON object of ID and username, for 1 for Alex, 2 Alex, and 3 Bob, right? And if we went back and ran that query like we did before, that's the data we got, was those things. So everything's all working. Let's try the next step. So you're going to want to pass in some parameters, or do some better searching than pulling everything from a certain category. So get sample data by username. This is going to take in a username as well as the callback. We can go ahead and just copy this little chunk here, paste that in there, and we're going to modify this. So to avoid, this library has a way to avoid SQL injection. That's a way that people can write malicious statements, whether you're doing like a username and people write like drop tables sort of things. This should help prevent against it. So the way we do that is basically wherever you're going to put dynamic data, in this case a username, we're going to put a question mark. And the ordering that they appear in the statement is super, super important when we go to write it in the next part. So we're going to select all from users where username, and we have a capital N on username for some weird reason, is equal to question mark. Okay, and that's saying that there's going to be some dynamic piece of data that I want you to put into my query. And that's what this library MySQL understands. So after query, we're going to feed this an array of one value. But just keep in mind you can feed it like way more than one value. And we're going to feed it username. And so the username is going to get passed in there. And what it's going to do is it's going to go along this query. It's going to find the first question mark and give it to the first value. So if you had like username like 3 times, and we'll just say that this was a valid SQL statement for some reason, okay? It's going to match the first one to the first value, okay? So when you're writing this, make sure it matches this, okay? And that's where most people are going to run into issues. So make sure that that is being checked when you guys are writing your SQL statements. Okay, so we're going to select all from users where username is dynamic value of username. And then we're going to just throw back us the results here. Beautiful. Okay, so let's go ahead. We'll copy this. We'll say get sample data by username. We're going to pass in Bob. And we're going to hit play. And so you're going to see we got 3 for Bob. And then our big blob we were getting before. And just like I was saying before, you're going to notice that the Bob one returns first. And that's just because it's a quicker query than returning everything. So when you're doing queries, even though our ordering was completely different than the results, you got to keep that in mind. So if we wanted to fix this so one ran after the other, we could do something like this. We might lose reference to this. We actually will lose reference to this. So we'll say let server equal to this. And I'm just going to type this as R because we might have issues with that. And you'll see that it now indeed runs this first and then our Bob one second. So just keep that in mind when you are doing server stuff, that things are coming back before you're doing the next call. And this is the perfect place to stop. So what did we learn? We learned how to connect our Node.js server to our database. It can determine whether it's local or hosted, which is awesome. And we have files to set based on which one we are. We're able to create a database, talk to it, and pull from data from our tables. So what I want you guys to try is go ahead, make another table if you want or whatever, and just try some different things. Go to like the W3 schools here and just like get familiar with like doing different syntax and kind of doing like what they're doing, maybe mimic what their database is. So let's see here, like an order by, and it's like, okay, this is how you do an order by. Here's a demo database. Maybe go ahead and create this database. Do an integer, do a string, maybe a string for this one, like a varchar for these. Varchar, maybe just to keep it simple, they're all just actually as varchars. And then yeah, start doing some samples off of the thing, right? This is selecting all from customers, order by country, right? So that's a super handy one. Maybe when we're pulling our usernames back, we want them to be ordered by username first in alphabetical order or something. So go ahead and give that a try. We're going to be attempting to hook this into a more gamey friendly thing by doing a user login next. So stay tuned for that. And as always, have a good one, guys. Make sure you guys give a like, comment, subscribe, share. We're trying to get to 1,000 here. subscribers, and I think there's like a bell or something. You guys are supposed to hit a bell. Everybody's like, hit that bell. So yeah, just check that out, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Hey guys, I just wanted to make sure that I give a nice shout out to all my Patreons over on Patreon. And they're going to be in the following list for you. Arthur Zhang, ARVR 2020, Timothy McCoon, Chris Jarosco. Hey everyone, if you guys liked the video, make sure you guys click that subscribe button, give it a like, and make sure to comment. It really helps out. And if you guys are looking to support the project further, I also have my Patreon, which will be linked in the description down below. Thank you, and have a good day.